The ideas expressed in the following presentations are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of ACI or its committees.
Good evening. We're very pleased to let you know that the 2016 document has been in print since July, so if you don't have your eyes on the document, you should be aware of it. There were some significant changes. If you like those changes, you should thank our past chairman, Mr. Cornell, who's in the back of the room. If you don't like those changes, blame the former secretary, who is the new chair. But we did a lot to advance the document, add some new provisions, and of course, follow 318. So my job today isn't to break into the construction document portion of it. I want to save that for Nick and Frank, who are going to go over how to utilize this document and how to cover Chapter 26. So I just want to give you a brief overview of what's in the document. A lot of people never open 301 unless a lawyer calls them. So we want to make sure you're aware of what's in the document, what topics we cover. And for the gentleman who asked about drilled piers, that was more of a question for 301 than it really is for 318. So we'll go there as well. So 301 is referenced in contract documents of a project and is a very common default specification that is referenced. So people should be aware of what the content is in 301. It is written not to the licensed design professional, but instead to the contractor. So the language is for the contractor to build the project. And there are some provisions in 301 that are different than the way 318 is designed as a code commentary. So we will talk about the notes to the specifier and the checklists that are mandatory versus some optional requirements to give you a different way of doing things if you like. So with contract documents, it's important to think about all the things that we go into the big picture. And 301 is meant to be a default specification. We're trying to cover all ends to make concrete turn out for the owners, but also be user-friendly for the contractor where appropriate. Drawings and the notes, and there might be some additional specifications beyond 301, but 301 tends to be the default that a lot of specifiers use to make sure that they've covered all of their angles. And there's a different way of saying that. But there are many other ACI specifications out there, such as drilled piers. There may be some other specialty provisions that you may be using that specification instead on your project. And whether or not you should also utilize 301 is dependent on what you're building, but it does tend to be the general scope of concrete construction. And it's meant to be for structural concrete as well as some non-structural applications. So we do get into that. And of course, within 301 and within many other ACI documents, we do specify the use of materials and testing specifications that are in ASTM, such as the cement specification or testing by the fabulous slump foam. So we do have to look into what's in those documents and make sure that we include them. It is a legal document once it becomes part of the contract documents. And that is why most people don't open it until somebody legal calls them. But you really need to know what's in it because there's a lot of default information. And there are things we've removed over the years. A lot of people like to keep doing things the way they've always done it, and maybe in 2016 that provision is no longer in 301. You need to be aware of that and what things we've changed. So it is a part of the specification, and it will give guidance directly to the contractor in language that is mandatory. Any optional language is only to the specifier as a way to do things differently. So the non-mandatory portion of 301, for those of us who aren't intimate with the document, is on the back. The last few pages are a mandatory and optional checklist written to the specifier to have them make decisions on how they're going to do this project. We have examples, and I believe Frank's going to go through several, and Nick's going to show how to pull this document into your contract documents. But it's really the trigger language is how we use 301, and Nick's going to cover that in more detail, but an example would be as specified in the contract documents. Well, if it says that, then the specifier must declare something. One of the most common things that the specifier does is say how strong the concrete is going to be. So F prime C is an example. It might be maximum size of aggregate. It might be tolerances on something like the reinforcement, whether you're using welded wire fabric or you have rebar tolerances as well. What we try to do within documents like 301 is make our life a little easier and follow other construction documents, such as the tolerances in 117. So we do reference other mandatory documents as well. We also have a special area of 301 where we do have examples of concrete structures that are maybe not in your project scope, but would be potentially in a future one. So we have special applications like mass concrete. We might have architectural concrete, silta, and so forth. We don't currently have drilled piers as a topic in 301, and not sure we're ready to tackle that in this cycle, but it might be something to consider that you would do sections 1 through 5 in your document as being appropriate. And we could give you examples within our document as to how those special applications have handled that. We also have other types of optional trigger language in our document, which has been up for debate whether or not it belongs in a mandatory document. But what we're trying to do is give the specifier opportunities to do things differently. Sometimes they don't like our defaults for various reasons, and they want to do things their own way. And so there are areas of 301 where it says, unless otherwise specified, which is telling the specifier, hey, do you want to do this a different way? Here's some things that you could change in this area, which we have defaults for, but you might want a different number, a different material, a different construction method. So it's the body of the specification has defaults. Back in the good old day, it had a default on slump for 4 inches. We no longer have that in the specification, but there might be one of you out there who cannot let go of that control and want to put a default slump back in. Or we would rather that the contractor decides what that slump is at this time. But there's other examples out there. Our reasons for choosing those numbers are based on a lot of history, a lot of happiness with how projects turn out when they're done correctly, and there is research behind most of the numbers. So we would like people to use our defaults where appropriate, but we understand that there are special circumstances where you need to change things. There's more than one way to skin a cat. It is also a flag for the specifier to look into their project and decide, is it okay to go with what are the common defaults in 301, or do I need to consider some alternative requirements? It's also a flag to the contractor that he or she could maybe do things differently as well. And so contractors request substitutions all the time. Contractors request alternate ways of doing things, so it gives them some opportunity as well. Within specifications, our goal is actually pretty simple. We want to be clear. We want to have a single interpretation. When I read something, I'm reading it one way, and typically pretty literally. And I hope you all read the same sentence I do. Same when I give a talk. But it's important that there's a single interpretation, that we don't have different meanings depending on who you're with and what you do in the concrete industry. We also want whatever the end goal is to be very clear for everybody, and it should be that whatever stated in a specification is easily achievable. We should only be listing requirements. We shouldn't be adding in a bunch of tidbits of knowledge to keep you more educated. That is not what a specification is for. That's what guides are for. And ACI has a lot of very, very friendly guides, very friendly information for you to learn more about that subject. That's not what a specification should be. It should be mandatory, clear, and very concise language. And again, it should be written so that there aren't different understandings of it. And we've tried over the years to clean up some of our ways of interpreting certain sentences within 301, usually by an example on a job site where it's taken. The other thing with the purpose of a spec is that it informs the contractor what needs to be done to meet the needs of the owner. And this is a huge takeaway because we've been working on it for many years. Several years ago, perhaps there were more specifications out there with methods and means listed very specifically, and a lot of prescription type of oriented, but we're trying to move away from that. Unless it's a specialty area, tilt-up might be a good example. Maybe there's a curb and gutter application with slip form, so there's a very specific way of placing that concrete. But if it's not a specialty application like that, we shouldn't be telling them how to do it. We should be telling them what we want. So it's more of a performance requirement. It might include a little prescription in the design and the mixture and some of the enhancements that we want, type of finish, but not necessarily the way to get it done. That should be up to the contractor. So those are our goals. With that said, there's a lot of other specifications that we need to lean on. And they're not always just ACI specifications, but these are some examples. Obviously, 318 is not a specification, but Terry mentioned and went through the overview of what's in the construction document portion. What we need to do is cover that, make sure it's all in our document. We're flagging the things that may or may not be in the document currently. We also need to lean on some other committees. One of the things that used to be in 301 that didn't belong there was language to the testing agency. That shouldn't have been in 301. It's a separate contract document between the owner and the testing lab. So that information has been removed from 301 2 cycles ago, and there's a lot of people that haven't caught on to that yet. And there's a separate committee at ACI, 311, which is inspection, that covers that topic. Whether or not you want to adopt that specification is up to your contract documents, just like whether or not you want to use 301. There are other specifications we use within 301, such as 117. We use C94, which is the standard spec for ready-mix concrete. We also lean on a few others outside of our areas of expertise, such as the Post-Tensioning Institute has a guide on materials and on construction and design. And then we have also leaned on the Concrete Reinforcing Steel Institute for their epoxy certification. There's some other examples. So we can lead on other industry guides as long as they are in mandatory language. If they're not in mandatory language, they do not have a place in our document. We cannot reference guides that are in ACI. It has to be in thou shalt. The other thing that we try to do is collaborate and write the information in the master format method. So it's a reference specification. It's meant to be in the 3-part format. So if you open up 301, you should see a general section, you should see a product section, and an execution section. So that's important for us to take away to actually be able to use the document and implement it in construction documents. The main body of our document, it has our general requirements, it has testing information, it tells you what type of tolerances we're going to cover, and that's typically 117, but there's some outside that scope. And then section 2 is our formwork and accessories. Section 3 is reinforcement and reinforcement supports. So we get into a lot on making sure that we have not only just the correct rebar, but also the certification for it and the tolerances. Section 4 is on our concrete mixtures. It's not necessarily doing the design for you, but telling you what materials to use. And then once the specifier has deemed the strength, it tells you if there's any that are restricted in the special areas. So if you move on after chapter 5, you'll see where there might be limitations on materials or other special materials used. One thing that happened in concrete mixtures, we added in information in the last cycle on self-consolidating concrete. There might be newer admixture technology. When I say new in our industry, we mean it's been around for 15 years. So we don't currently have information on corrosion inhibitors in our document. That needs to be included. It's 2016. So we have other examples of that. We had added in information on fibers because it's now in 318, but we haven't included large information on synthetic fibers, which has been in our industry for years. It's not like we're prohibiting them. We just don't talk about them in great detail. We need to include, all materials that are suitable for use in concrete. And then in section 5, that's where we get into the construction, talking about different ways of placing the concrete for general construction. If it's a specialty topic, it's going to be in one of the later chapters. Some of the optional sections, and it doesn't mean we've covered all our bases, these are meant to slightly harmonize with CSI and also cover topics that are within 318 and also commonly used in concrete construction. So we have section 6 on architectural concrete, which goes well beyond your typical form surfaces. And we had a long debate on what is exposed to view versus not. Section 7 is on our lightweight concrete, and that includes more than just lightweight aggregate. It might be fire-rated lightweight. We also have section 8 on mass concrete structures, and there were significant changes in the last 2 cycles on this. When I first joined 301 back in 1999, when Cal was our chair, we had provisions that were very basic in the mass concrete section of make it 70 degrees. We'll be all happy. But in Florida, other states, that's not necessarily the most economical way of doing things these days. It might be the best way for you on one project, but nowadays most people look at their thermal control plan a little closer and have successful concrete placed at 90 degrees, 100 degrees, and can still be mass concrete, but they need thermal control, they need cooling, they need protection. So that chapter has grown quite a bit over the past 10 years. We also greatly increased the post-tension concrete chapter to first, I would say, in 2010, write a lot of new provisions, but then in the 2016, what we did is we deferred to the Post-Tensioning Institute guys. And so they have mandatory documents available in our industry, and we now refer to those. In Chapter 10, and this is a change from the past documents, we have the shrinkage compensating concrete chapter that many people probably use for specialty areas, but now it's not an all-encompassing. There were some phone calls and some lawyers involved that made people sensitive to the fact that the chapter hadn't been updated in several years. And the way we do things nowadays with shrinkage compensating, and there is a separate committee on this, we decided that the information that was in it was appropriate for interior slabs, but wasn't necessarily appropriate for domes or for vertical construction and others. So we weren't ready to expand to that by the time we had our deadline. So instead we changed the scope to limit it to interior floors. So we're not saying you can't successfully do shrinkage compensating concrete in other applications. We're saying we didn't have that content confidently in 301 at this time. So we also include some other information, section 11 on industrial floor slabs, a lot of information on how to construct and place those, and it's well beyond what is in chapter 5 for typical floors, interior floors. And then we also have a chapter on tilt-up construction, and then our last two chapters coincide with CSI format on precast structural and precast architectural. So there's a lot of information in 301. And I'm sure there's a concrete structure out there that doesn't meet one of those special applications, and you have to go to another committee for it. We have considered adding other chapters. We've also considered, instead of making them separate chapters, doing like what we did with self-consolidating concrete and accepting that it's just another type of concrete. It's not overly special anymore at 2016. Sorry if you're on that committee. But we've accepted it in our industry, and so it really just needed to have some placement and testing provisions and some information on the difference in the mixtures. We're considering something similar for shotcrete for the next cycle. We'll see how it goes. But I don't expect, we'll see how we end up, but we don't expect it to be a separate chapter at this time. So, in summary, that's a lot of information for a new document that's been around for a very long time, but it's really important takeaway is to lean on Nick and Frank as they talk about how to incorporate it into your construction documents and how to work with the 318 chapter 26. But the real goal of 301 is pretty simple. We want to be clear. We want to state what we want. We want you to be able to understand it and do it. We also want to make sure that if you want it done, that it's actually in our document. There's many times that we assume you're going to cure concrete, but we don't write about it in the construction document. If you don't ask for it, it's not going to happen. So we need to write very specific, to some of us, very obvious provisions within specifications, but if they're not requested, they won't occur. And then we really need to stop telling everyone how to do their job, but mostly just make sure that the owner gets exactly what they requested. Not just strength, but every other performance requirement that they ask for. So if we can do that well in a document and let the contractor do things more than one way, that's the best way to go about it. Doesn't mean we remove every single prescriptive provision within 301. It just means we give them options. With that said, I'm going to open it up to questions. And I know the gentleman had a question on drilled piers. So to answer your question, I would say that you do have the opportunity to reference 301. You probably would want to look closely at what's in sections 1 through 5 and make sure it covers everything that you want for general concrete. But then your provisions within the drilled pier document would have to go beyond it. So you can look at the way that we've done our special applications. And it says basically follow sections 1 through 5, except for where it's written here. And you add on all the other special criteria that you have for that type of concrete. Does that answer your question? If you ran away after the period. Okay. Any other questions? Clear as mud? All right. Thank you very much.